I defected from North Korea in the year 1997 during what is called the Arduous March, a time when about 3 million people were starving to death in North Korea. My uncle, he was actually the very first person in my family to starve to death. And then my grandmother also passed away from starvation. And my family was actually in a touch-and-go situation. My mother, my older brother, my younger sibling, they were all just skin and bones. So they could have actually starved to death in just a few days. So in that situation, I thought we'd die if we stayed like this. Yeah, and from the stories I heard back then, if you go to China, you can at least survive. Even if you scavenge for food on the streets, you won't have a problem surviving. I heard a lot of stories that even beggars live better there than people in North Korea.
Since I was a kojebi. As you might already know, a kojebi is actually just a person who is homeless, someone without a place to live. We were just homeless, and then my mother left us behind, saying she'd go to China and come back, and to wait until then. After she left like that, we had nothing, no home. Since we had nothing, we just had to get by, From then on, yeah, it was just about making do, really. Well, I actually spent quite a bit of time at the market, known as the Jangmadang, just looking around and seeing what was going on. I would just sit there quietly, not saying anything. I mean, what can a 13 or 14-year-old kid really do in that kind of situation? It's not like I had ever worked to make a living or tried to put food on the table before. So I just sat there like that, and I stayed there for about 3 days. It was basically like sitting there and waiting to die. Begging for food was really hard too, yeah, but then my younger brother came to me. He said, "Brother, you'll die if you stay like this. Get up and find something to eat." Yeah, so I started picking things up off the ground to eat, yeah. But can you really get full from picking things up off the ground? No, you can't, right? You're just searching. So that did not work. However, my brother was a bit different from me back then. He would somehow find things and bring them to me. He'd bring rice or bread and put it in my mouth. He'd press it into my hand and tell me to eat before leaving. Yeah, so that was my reality for that season.
During COVID, life for North Koreans became extremely hard. At that time, more people died of starvation than from the actual virus. So, as I mentioned earlier, even before I left, many people were starving to death. For example, in my area, the neighborhood unit leader goes from door to door in the apartment complex every day to check everyone's temperature, to see if they have a fever or anything related to COVID, but then a door to one house just wouldn't open. The door stayed locked for a while, so on the second day, they broke it down with a security officer and went inside. They found a mother and daughter who had died of starvation while holding each other, because there's nothing left. Since the state can't solve the problem, mothers and daughters have been found dead from starvation, just holding each other. And in the island regions, it's even harder to make a living, so bodies are discovered every single day. Bodies are found every day, and because so many people are dying, they should be given coffins, but they can't afford them, so there are many cases where they're just buried in the ground. To tell you about the current reality in North Korea, the food problem is the most difficult. The food situation is truly dire. Yes, so I don't know how it is now, but until October 2023, before I came here, there were so many people dying.
그래서 엄마가 호르몬 키운다 그래서 순천에 가서 길에서 바깥에서 살아.
Since we no longer had our parents, we were sent to live with our grandmother. That's really when the true hardship began, constant hunger and all kinds of suffering. From my grandmother's home, we later moved together to an aunt's house in a rural area, an extremely remote countryside. There were 5 of us in the household, but nothing to eat. There was simply no food at all. I went through that period, just sitting there empty and hungry, when I was about 19 or 20 years old. That was around 2003, 2004, 2005. During those years, it happened regularly every year. Around April or May, that season would come. It was the time when food would completely run out. Yes. It got to the point where just being alive felt like a burden, like a kind of guilt. I found myself thinking, why am I even alive? This was the first time I felt this way. That was the period, and there are many things about how I lived through it, many experiences along the way. But after enduring so much hardship, there came a moment when I began to open my eyes to things. Before that, there was a particular turning point. Life had become so difficult because most of the time we survived by foraging in the mountains. I'd dig for herbs, pick ferns and wild greens, and even catch wild animals on mountains 1100 meters high. I lived doing that, but my life didn't get any better and I just kept falling deeper into debt. So I'd put on my herb backpack and climb all the way to the very top. At 1100 meters, there are these high boulders where they say even the clouds stop to rest before passing. The wind blows so hard up there. It's incredibly windy. You can't even hear yourself speak. But I'd stand there and scream, venting my resentment toward God, just shouting. I'd recite Philippians 4:13, shouting, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, but then ask, what am I even supposed to do? Matthew says not to worry about what to eat or wear, but I'd cry on my way down, asking why this was happening to me. Doing that would bring some peace, and at some point my eyes finally began to open. And so after that, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore.
A lot happened during that time, like people being killed just for watching South Korean media and always being controlled wherever I went. I had this thought, I'm making money, but can this money actually make me happy? There was absolutely no hope, so I was suffering from depression. I just wanted to end it all. I just hated the fact that I was even born.
But as for me, although I was naturally frail and in a weak state from not eating well, I hadn't caught the disease yet. So, following my uncle, I actually attempted to escape from North Korea. It was June back then. The rainy season had just begun, bringing with it a sense of dampness in the air. Since we were in Hamhung, we traveled toward Onsong, which is near the Tumen River and the Chinese border, intending to cross the river. It just so happened that a heavy rain shower had just passed through, leaving everything wet and slippery. While crossing the Tumen River, an unexpected accident occurred. So, at first, before we actually tried crossing, there was this small Chinese village over on the other side. My uncle and I looked at each other and said, let's try to get some help over there in that village. We planned to get some food, clothes, and maybe some rice before coming back, so we set off with that in mind. But once we actually jumped into the river and finally got in, the current was incredibly strong. Yes, because the rainy season had started and it had just rained, the current was so powerful and strong that rocks and even large boulders were rolling along the bottom. We were supposed to swim forward through that current, but it was simply impossible for us to do so. So I was being swept away, and my uncle was too. We started holding hands, but as the water deepened and the current surged, we lost our grip. He struggled for a bit before suddenly vanishing downstream. I kept drifting slowly down the river too, unable to really move forward. Instead of making progress, I was just struggling as the strong current kept pushing me along, until after a while, I somehow managed to finally reach the Chinese shore. Yes, I had almost lost consciousness by the time I landed. When I came to, my uncle was nowhere to be seen. I was all alone on Chinese soil. I knew, almost instinctively, that something terrible had happened to him. Since I had nearly died myself, I realized that my uncle must have been swept away and met with a truly tragic end.
So we finally set off on October 22nd, 2023. Because of the continuous sea warnings, we were delayed and finally left on October 22nd and arrived on the 24th. We docked at an uncontrolled pier and picked up my mom and aunt. Our boat was small, but it had a cabin and a fish hold. If we hid them in there and locked the cabin door, no one would know. When we started it up, it made a huge noise. Then the person in charge came out and started shouting, asking where we were going. I thought, am I going to get caught and die right here? But I just said, oh, we're just going to our pier, and managed to get past that moment. But the biggest problem was crossing the NLL. That was the most difficult part. We took a detour. Normally it takes less than 10 hours to get to South Korea. But it took 44 hours because we only traveled at night and took a detour. I realized then how terrifying the open sea really is. As we were leaving, I was happy, of course. I was so happy just to have made the attempt, and while my mom was full of worry, I was just so happy. There was really nothing but our boat. But 4 hours before crossing the NLL, a mysterious light suddenly appeared. That was a North Korean patrol boat. At that time, we didn't want to believe it. We just thought, it's probably just some other boat. But we couldn't help but believe it when we looked back, though we couldn't tell how far away that North Korean patrol boat was. Since we were out at sea, the lights, like red lights, they were threatening us with those very bright, flashing lights. They were flashing so intensely, threatening us not to go any further, and seeing that made my heart race. I was so anxious, and I realized how difficult the road to freedom truly is. If we were caught, we would have been shot immediately. They would have just killed everyone. Kill all defectors. That was the policy issued by the North Korean government. In that moment, as they were chasing us, I think I prayed so hard. If God truly exists, please give my family just one chance. I prayed so desperately for just one chance to live like a human being, promising to live a wonderful life if given that chance. I was praying with such desperation, and before we knew it, we had crossed the NLL. But the reason we were able to cross was that God truly helped us. Suddenly the waves started crashing tremendously. So I thought, what is this situation? Are we going to die? I thought that, but it turned out those waves saved us. I think God really does exist. We experienced it firsthand. I didn't believe in God. But after that, I started to believe, truly, wow. The reason those waves saved us was that they pushed us forward faster, and normally a large boat would catch us in an instant. But because of those waves, their progress was slowed down, since they were fighting against them. So it all felt like divine intervention, and 5 minutes before we crossed the NLL, I looked back. The North Korean patrol boat that was chasing us turned around the moment we crossed the NLL border. So I realized, oh, that really was a North Korean patrol boat. After arriving in South Korean waters off Sokcho, the Navy, Army and Air Force all showed up at once. All the military branches were there. These massive ships surrounded our little boat and helicopters were filming from above. It was absolute chaos. That was the kind of moment I experienced.
2 years earlier, I had arranged my uncle's defection to South Korea. But the escape was difficult and he was forced to leave behind his 3-year-old daughter. By then, she was 6. My uncle pleaded with me to bring her with me. In the middle of the night, we began the escape. I carried her on my back and rode my motorcycle to the Tumen River. When we arrived, I pushed the motorcycle into the river and left it behind. The code word I would tell to the patrol soldiers was that I was going to China for a bit. But this time, since I had a child on my back like this, he noticed something was different. Questioned, you said you'd be coming right back, so I just said, yes, I'll be right back. He led us to the riverbank and said, brother, you can cross here. I was anxious with my cousin on my back and was hurrying to cross when he called out, brother. So I turned around and he said, don't get caught and have a happy life. Wow, he knew I was leaving, that I wasn't coming back. Remember, they are North Korean border patrol soldiers. We got on a bus in China, there were 6 of us. I had my cousin and 4 women, and we were laying down in a sleeper bus that had beds. The trip took a week, but because I'd been caught once, I was scared and nervous and couldn't sleep or eat. It had been exactly 4 years since I'd been caught, so even when the bus slowed down just a bit, I'd pull the curtain and look. I just couldn't sleep at all. But since I was just sitting there with nothing else to do, all I could really do was pray. I really just prayed. But the prayer was simple, just one prayer request. If my life doesn't end here, if there's more life ahead of me, let me reach South Korea. Yes, I kept praying that where I was sitting would become South Korea. That's how I crossed into Thailand. Once I crossed into Thailand, at that time, the freedom felt real. So after not eating, I came to Thailand, and this was my final episode before I came to Korea. Yeah, so that's how I came to South Korea, and yes, now that I'm in Korea, I started a new life.
Underground churches exist where people practice their faith in secret. For example, before the Korean War, there were actually many people who had faith. There was the Great Pyongyang Revival in the past. And was it America? As far as I know, an American missionary went to the Taedong River to preach the gospel. Yeah, so there were actually many believers in Pyongyang. Of course, many came over to South Korea, but there are actually many Christians who couldn't come over.
Well, I believe the most fundamental reason why South Korea has developed in this particular way and why it has been so open and willing to accept the gospel comes down to something quite significant. It really has to do with the work and dedication of American missionaries. Their presence and efforts made a lasting impact on Korean society, especially in terms of spreading the Christian faith. So from my current perspective, looking back on how things have unfolded, I truly think that American missionaries played a central role in shaping the way South Korea has grown and embraced the gospel. What I want to ask of the American churches and those who are praying for and interested in North Korea is that we now need missionaries, like the first missionaries in Korea, such as Henry Appenzeller Horace Underwood, and Robert Thomas, who came and were martyred while sowing the seeds of the gospel in South Korea. The seeds are already sown in North Korea. Now we need a second Underwood, Appenzeller, or Thomas to work there. Please just know that we are fully prepared for what is to come, and I sincerely hope you will continue to pray with us until the very end.
These people still have faith, and although they can't pray or practice openly, they believe in God in their hearts. They live a life of prayer and worship. And, if they get the chance, they might ask someone close to them, would you like to believe in God? So there aren't many of them. Really, there aren't many, and they can't practice their faith openly. But there are a few who believe quietly, what we call underground Christians.
Through that experience, I came to believe that God truly exists. I never thought he didn't exist before, but I think it was a turning point that gave me a firmer faith. So for me, I realized that God is supporting and helping me and always thinking of me. And since then, I think I've gradually developed more of a heart for faith.
During the time when I was crossing the Tumen River, at that time, first I lost my uncle, and then I lost everything, right? I left my family, I left my country, even my uncle, he also left me. He just wasn't there with me anymore. And that really made me feel even more alone. It was tough, honestly, because I didn't really know what to do or who to turn to at that point. I didn't know God, but I just prayed anyway, hoping maybe someone out there was listening. Just, like Guri said before, I tried to reach out in the only way I could think of, even though I wasn't sure if it would help. So for me, it was honestly the same. I didn't call out to God, but please help me. Help, somebody help. Nobody was there, but I just, said a kind of prayer, God help me, everybody help me, somebody help me. I just, said that. Yeah, even though I didn't know about God, I thought that was prayer. Yeah, and then God heard me and then answered me, and then I just believed that he has led me this far.
And when that land is eventually unified through the gospel, my dream is to build a beautiful church in my own hometown. 사실은 제가 As I was making my final escape from North Korea, I made a vow on the bus. I told God that if I made it to South Korea, I would live like Samuel, yes, like Samuel, and give my whole life to him. I remember how desperate and sincere I was when I made that promise.
Getting involved means, in the end, there are various ways to try and change North Korea. Yes, whether it's sending supplies or supporting those doing such work, there are many ways. But by participating together in any way, yes, a world where in North Korea too, just like our fellow Christians in America, a day where they can freely praise and worship God. I want to say that I hope we can participate and pray together to bring that day closer and make it come quickly.
It's not just pastors who are specifically called to do what God wants. Wherever we are, living a life that God desires, a life together with God. That's what I believe God truly wants most.
And this is the last hour of this crusade.
이 전도 집회의 마지막 시간입니다.
It will soon be over.
이제 잠시 후에는 다 끝마칩니다.
What a moment to receive Christ.
예수